coming out to this afternoon celebration of research and creative scholarship. You know, Andrews University, for an institution our size, we do some very heavy lifting. Let me give you a sense of the kinds of things that came to my mind as I was sitting there that happened between last Thursday and this afternoon. There's a flavor. So last Thursday, we had a chemistry seminar, Chem-Sem, and we invited one of the leaders in Congress to speak to our students because she's chair of that science committee. Happened on last Thursday. Concurrently, last Thursday was the opening of our Congress on Social Justice for that weekend. Thursday into Friday, we had a Congress on Social Justice. On Monday, earlier this week, we had a Wallen lectureship hosted by the English department. Then we had our Kingman lectureship hosted by STEM, physics, engineering, math, hosted a Kingman lectureship. Followed up by, last evening, we had a celebration of community engagement, and we showed the different ways in which the faculty and departments are engaged in the lives of members of our community. Communities, if you will, showing the impact that Andrews has in our communities around us. Concurrently, we had a pause moment where we were coming together to recognize those whom we have lost to COVID and other means, other causes, in the last 18, 20 months or so. Because we recognize that as students and employees have lost loved ones, we didn't quite have enough time to grieve because life continued on within a pandemic. So we are pausing to provide space for pausing and for grief last evening. It continues this evening and continues tomorrow. And right now, we're here to celebrate research and creative scholarship. We lift above our bench strength. That's a phrase that was said to me by the most recent HLC visit team. During the exit interview, they talked about what they saw at Andrews, and they underscored the work that you do as faculty in the area of research. And said, we're amazed for an institution your size, with your number of faculty, the depth, the quality, and the breadth of research that you do with your students. And said, for your size, you're lifting above your bench strength. And I simply smiled and said, that's who we are. That's how we live. And if Dwayne McBride were here, I hope he's listening online somewhere, if Dwayne McBride were here, he would say, that's because at Andrews, we see research as a means to enhance our witness. While we can't reach certain countries because of limitations to access, we can't reach those countries through evangelism. We reach them through our research because they download our papers, see the works that we do, cite our work. Research is part of our witness. So wherever you are in this building, online, looking at this tomorrow, next week, after the fact, thank you for being part of this great celebration this evening. We celebrate the work of our faculty, celebrate the work of our students. And I need to say that it makes me proud to be part of the Andrews community. When I talk with my colleagues across this nation, across the globe, and they know who we are and what we do, they're amazed. They're in amazement of the kinds of things we do as a university. Thank you for your work. Thank you for being here. Thank you for celebrating your accomplishments in research. God bless you, and thank you very much.
It was 10 years ago that we established the Siegfried H. Horn Award for Excellence in Research and Creative Scholarship. Its purpose is to acknowledge those faculty members who, through dedication and service, have gone above and beyond what is expected in the areas of research and creative scholarship. Unfortunately, we were not able to meet last year here. So what we're going to do today is honor both the 2020 award winners and the 2021 award winners. In 2020, the award winners were Gustavo Gregorutti and Joseph Kidder. And in 2021, the award winners were Anaris Corionavia and Chi Young Yoon. So Chi Young Yoon is giving a recital on November 21 in the Howard Performing Arts Center. I encourage you all to be there. Because she is doing that, we did not ask her to give a plenary presentation. The other three will give a plenary presentation. But right now, if Chi Young would come down and just spend a couple minutes telling us about what she is doing on November 21. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Good afternoon. So I was asked to speak a little bit about the program that I'll be performing for the Howard Series concert on November 21st. The programs that I selected are two sonatas, the two truly master pieces, works from the Romantic era, the first one being Chopin's third and last piano sonata in B minor, and the other being the Schubert's last sonata in B-flat major. The Chopin sonata was composed in 1844, it's just 5 years before his death. And Chopin, being the great melodist of the piano, he achieves in his final sonata a towering masterpiece that combines a monumental structure while remaining true to the romantic and poetic fingerprint of its creator. From a martial opening to its nocturnal, heart-wrenching slow movement, this sonata represents the epitome of Chopin's style and use of color, emotional intensity, poise, and virtuosity. The second piece, Schubert's piano sonata in B-flat major, was written just 1 month prior to his early death, just the age of 31 years old. This work was not published until 10 years after his death. The sonata's different movements are held together by motivic and harmonic elements, and this masterpiece really plumbs the depths of the human heart. It is ethereal, heavenly, sublime, and it really pulls on the heartstrings. And it ends with just the most delightful of the melody. I will play a short excerpt of the Schubert's first movement. And as you listen, I ask that you reflect on the words of the 1 Corinthians 2:19. Eyes hath not seen, nor ears heard, neither have they entered the heart of man, that what God had prepared for them, for those that love him. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we all look forward to the full concert in November. Our first plenary speaker is Professor Inaris Correa-Navia. She is Professor of Curriculum and Instruction and the Director of the Center for Effective Teaching and Learning. She also is the director of the annual Teaching and Learning Conference that we host here on campus the last week of March every year, and she draws an international constituency to that conference. So let's thank Professor Correa-Navia.
Oh, no mask. That's why we're doing it here. Great. Okay. I am honored and deeply humbled to have received the Siegfried H. Horn Award for Excellence in Research and Creative Scholarship. Thank you to the committee and to the Office of Research and Creative Scholarship for this recognition. With utmost appreciation, I share this award with my family, friends who are like family, research partners and co-authors, amazing colleagues and students. In particular, I would like to honor and thank Dr. Jerry Thayer for the significant contributions he made to my development as a scholar practitioner. Jerry spent an incalculable number of hours mentoring, coaching, teaching, and walking alongside me to support the completion of our research projects. He also made it possible for several honors and graduate students to have expert advice on research design and statistical analysis. Jerry, you are one of the most generous humans I know, and I will forever be grateful for your mentorship and your friendship. I would also like to highlight and acknowledge my partnership with Scott Moncrief, with whom I authored the last 3 articles on professional learning and development. This was an emerging area of scholarship for both of us, and we successfully had all 3 articles published or accepted for publication. These and many other collaborations qualified me for this recognition, but I can say with certainty that it would not have been possible without these partnerships. I would far exceed the time allowed for this presentation if I mentioned each person and their contributions. So I created a slide that I will leave on the screen for a few minutes to honor them. My heart is full of gratitude to God for placing you, each one of you, in my life. This presentation is entitled A Collaborative Action Research Model for Equity-Minded Professional Growth and Well-Being, and it is divided into 3 parts. First, I will share how my personal and professional life and experiences shape the way I engage in scholarship. Second, I will provide some examples of how I used action research in past projects and the advantages and disadvantages of the model. And third, I will present a current problem here at Andrews University that we can use as an example to walk through together the steps of an action research model. An action research model focuses on evidence-based practical applications of results. I was a young child in Argentina during the last years of the military government, and inevitably the political and social context shaped the way humans see work and employee-employer relations. That may have been a foreign concept for a United States context, but since March of 2020, we are no strangers to significant change in the way people see work here, too. Workspaces were revered in my small town of Libertador, San Martin. My parents, in particular, model respect for the employer and the appreciation to have work, even if it wasn't always an excellent fit. Their loyalty to the employer was evident in 2 major ways. First, how much they worked, and second, how hard they worked. As a result of these family commitments and values and my parents' example, my siblings and I worked for pay outside of the home at an early age. At 12, I was on the local hospital's payroll helping in the lab, cleaning the floors, and washing the test tubes. At 14, I was a dental assistant, if you can imagine, and the list goes on. My mom would always tell my siblings and me, leave places better than you found them. Although I admit that most often she meant pick up your shoes and put them away, she really was instilling in us the importance of engaged work and quality work. Aside from having to wake up early on Sunday mornings, which understandably were the heaviest working days during school months, everything I remember about those experiences is positive. I have come to appreciate them more as I reflected on what inspires me to use an evidence-based approach to improve the organizations in which I work. Leave places better than you found them. The action research model fits quite naturally with these life experiences and values. The action research model was first developed by Kurt Lewin in the 1940s. Kurt Lewin was a German-American social psychologist, but is still widely used today. The Glossary of Education Reform defines action research as a wide variety of evaluative, investigative, and analytical research methods designed to diagnose problems or weaknesses, whether organizational, academic, or instructional, and to help educators develop practical solutions to address them quickly and efficiently. Action research might also be applied to programs or educational techniques that are not necessarily experiencing any problems, but that educators simply want to learn more about and improve. The general goal is to create a simple, practical, repeatable process of iterative learning, evaluation, and improvement that leads to increasingly better results for schools, teachers, and programs. I enter the definition in a word cloud to highlight the keywords. The steps of an action research project include identifying the problem, collecting data, organizing, analyzing, and interpreting the data, developing a plan to address the problem, implementing the plan, and evaluating the results. Many benefits of action research have been stated in the literature, such as high levels of relevance, methodologically flexible, inherently multidisciplinary, and fostering collaboration. The two benefits that are most important to me are, number one, it is transformative for my students. I use action research in my teaching, particularly in the course Facilitating Change in Learning Organizations. Students have responded positively to their learning experiences in the course using this model. At first, they want to solve big problems, such as standardized testing in the United States. But more often than not, they follow my counsel and focus on relevant, pressing, job-embedded problems, such as improving the well-being of principals in small schools, retention of nursing minority faculty in small institutions, or using equity-minded practices to close the achievement gap in their local school. Seeing my students develop action research proposals successfully, and in many cases implementing them, brings me joy because I know it brings them a palpable sense of accomplishment. The second benefit of action research is that it's a natural fit for my responsibilities and my training. I took the road less traveled to a position in higher education. I figured my way through a doctoral program in a large institution that, while prestigious, didn't really have strong mentoring and support system for working educators. I paid enough attention and did my work relatively well, but I also gave birth to my son Lucas in my first year of the program. The program was designed for working educators, but I didn't really know what to ask, how to fully engage in the opportunities, and I was just focused on finishing the program. Since I didn't take full advantage of the possibilities of my terminal degree training, I always had to learn on the job. Therefore, I focused on the praxis. I found myself paying attention to the problems to find evidence-based solutions or to imagine and study ways in which systems could work in more optimal ways. For example, at Antioch College, I created a proficiency-based language program that is still being used today. Students in a language emphasis track achieve an intermediate high proficiency level in a world language other than their own. This proficiency target is equivalent to what is expected for teacher certification, so it is quite high. This program was created following evidence-based practices in language acquisition research. It provided a solution for students who wanted to achieve a world language proficiency and fluency, but did not want to major in it. As I reflect on these projects and their impact, only a few times they resulted in publications. Mainly, they simply served to help us do our jobs better. There are some disadvantages of the model. Some of them are over-involvement, resulting in subjective analysis and bias in how long it takes. While you're in a research project, sometimes the problem may be resolved in other ways or is no longer a priority. However, one of the biggest disadvantages, in my opinion, is not being close enough to the decision-making and the resources for the implementation. This is what happened with the Strengthening Adventist Education study that Jerry and I authored in 2016. In this study, we conducted 16 focus groups in 8 of the North American Division unions to determine whether reform strategies were feasible and whether they were a priority. The North American Division generously funded the project, and we worked on it for 2 years. We were told in almost all of our focus groups that previous research findings had made no significant impact in system-wide reform. Nevertheless, we were optimistic. The collective wisdom was right. Although we worked closely with the task group that needed the data to inform the recommendations, at the end of the day, we didn't have any authority to implement the research and no say on how the results were used. The good news is that 2 of the 5 major recommendations we made were picked up by different groups, and subsequent work was done on them. We are especially happy to see the work that has been done in the area of pastor-teacher relationships. For example, the seminary made a decision to hire a faculty member to lead pastor-teacher collaboration curricula, and there has been more awareness at the conference and union level of the importance of collaboration between pastors and teachers, which we coined to be a ministry team. The second spin-off of Strengthening Adventist Education has been the Excellence in Small Schools project that Jerry and I are conducting in collaboration with Amy Loikert and Elisa Quito of the Center for Research in K-12 Adventist Education at La Sierra University. This project is a good example of how action research can be used to find out more about a topic and not necessarily to solve a problem. We hope that this study, which is still underway, will help us celebrate the work of small schools across the North American Division. While not all efforts were lost, we learned that being closer to the implementation and evaluation is important. While we have publications that came out of this study, we cannot evaluate the impact of the work. Jerry and I are optimistic that this work will serve the Seventh-day Adventist K-12 system in the future. Many of the problems we faced 5 years ago remain unresolved. However, we are far too removed from the implementation and evaluation of the impact of the research, which I find to be the most challenging part of the model. These should not be discouraging for any scholar who wants to do research on Seventh-day Adventist education. I strongly believe that we have a responsibility to improve our schools through evidence-based approaches. Nevertheless, these lessons learned should help us make decisions on what kind of projects would be more likely to produce the expected change. In the last few minutes we have together, I'd like to present a problem that we can use to walk through an action research steps together. And I will invite your participation in some of these steps. Here we are. Identify the problem. Workload disparities at Andrews University affect faculty's well-being and ability to fulfill their hopes and dreams, and especially affect those from traditionally underrepresented and marginalized groups. Collect the data. This is preliminary data that was made available to Jerry Thayer and me by the Office of Human Resources, the Office of Research and Creative Scholarship, and the Outlook calendar invitations. And you'll see why I say this when I get to the next point. At Andrews University, the faculty are 39% female and 61% male. And yet 52% of chairs are females and 48% of chairs are male. I have never met a colleague who told me, I cannot wait for my turn to be chair. There may be some, but I have not met them yet. The university uses a system to record research and creative scholarship productivity called the FAR. We call it lovingly the FAR. The average score for female faculty in 2019 to 2020, 2020 to 2021 combined was 1 point. For male faculty during that same time period, the average score was 1.8, almost double. To get a sense of service in committees, I use the Outlook calendar tool. Though a searchable tool would be a good next step. I added up the membership of Graduate Council, Undergraduate Council, ACE, Senate, Faculty Policy and Development Council, Academic Operations, Effective Teaching and Learning. And the combined membership for these committees are 88 females and 50 males. This is a practice exercise, and it is incomplete, but it shows that we ought to start a dialogue on service load disparities. What is not included in this data is the service. What is not included in the surveys mentioned previously are the airport rides at 4 in the morning, the visits to the dorm when a student calls crying, the conversations in the office when there is a relationship breakup, career advising, mentoring, vespers, hosting the families of students at graduation, talking to prospective students at 11 p.m. because they are in another time zone, and the list goes on. My colleagues call that the unseen service. I don't think it's unseen. It's absolutely seen by the people who receive the service, but it is not always counted for advancement. One of my favorite moments at Faculty Institute this past August was listening to my colleagues share where they find inspiration and joy in teaching. Dr. Desi Davis, a professor in the social work department, told us that a student gratefully said this to her at graduation: "You carried me on your back." So I'm going to invite you to pause for a minute, close your eyes. When you ask your students to close your eyes, you want them to close your eyes, so please close your eyes with me. So take a few moments to pause. We are about to enter the Sabbath hours. What a gift. It has been an exciting and busy week. Think about the people you carried on your back this week. Thank God for giving you the strength to do it. Observing and listening are key to identifying problems and solutions. Organize, analyze, and interpret the data. The preliminary data that we have is in alignment with the literature. In the past 20 years, there have been multiple studies that suggest that women and faculty of color carry the heaviest service load for the institutions, and that they are less likely to advance and earn tenure at the same rate as their peers. The slides on the screen, which I'll have to go back. Okay. Show a selected reference list. And recent literature on the topic, also shown on the slides, suggests that the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated this problem. And I'm putting those two in red. Those are the most recent ones. This is my favorite, The Secret Service. It's one of my favorite titles. Okay. It also has been documented in the literature that the overwhelming disparity in service load for female and minority faculties affects their research productivity. We saw preliminary data at our institution that aligns with those studies. The American Council for Education published a report in 2020 entitled Equity-Minded Faculty Workloads, based on a study at 51 departments across the United States. It suggests that the time to create an equity-minded faculty workload is now. With this charge to institution, the plan proposes some of the components I outlined in the next step. And I'm gonna leave, okay, develop a plan, okay. These are some of the solutions that have been proposed in multiple research studies and an array of webinars, podcasts, and opinion articles from the Chronicle of Higher Education and Inside Higher Education, in addition to the report I just mentioned. I'm focusing on the ones that are financially sensible and that are closely placed at the faculty's reach in terms of decision making, except for affordable childcare. And these are the 8 that I am proposing for our exercise today. I'm going to say them once as a list, and then I'm going to ask you to upvote and downvote them as a practice. So number 1, use and improve or create a transparent system to collect data on faculty contributions. We don't really have reliable data, especially on when faculty earned tenure and when they advanced to the next rank and how many years they have been at rank, for example. Add a section in the faculty annual report that identifies areas of strength and interest and design a strengths-based plan for advancement. Create multiple paths for advancement and tenure. Reduce and redesign committee work. Acknowledge the unseen service work. Develop research grant priorities for chairs. Develop research grant priorities for female faculty, and facilitate affordable childcare. These 2 slides, no. These 2 slides show models and sort of a chart to consider different ways of counting for faculty contributions. Now I'm going to read those 8 again, and we're going to use our high-tech thumbs to upvote or downvote the 8 plan components as I read them one more time. So if you think that there is any merit or we should consider, you can use your thumbs up, and if you are not sure, you can use thumbs in the middle, and if you think there is no merit in this strategy or suggestion or component of the plan, then you can just do a thumbs down. Okay, number 1, use and improve or create a transparent system to collect data on faculty contributions. Okay? Add a section in the faculty annual report that it identifies areas of strength and interest in design a strengths-based plan for advancement. Okay? Create multiple paths for advancement and tenure. Okay, that one gets but the other 2 are kind of precursors to that, right? Okay, reduce and redesign committee work. Okay, 2 thumbs up, Bobby. Acknowledge the unseen service work. Okay? Develop research grant priorities for chairs. Okay? Develop research grant priorities for female faculty. And facilitate affordable childcare or other social safety nets, right? Not, okay. That seems to also be okay. Now, the last portion of the plan is evaluate the results of the action taken. And now I will ask you to be a bit braver, because I will ask, what would be the evidence that the implementation of the plan is working? And I'll give you about 30 seconds to think about what would be the evidence that the implementation plan is working, implementation of the plan is working. Still thinking time, so what would be the evidence that the implementation of the plan is working? Yes?
Those disparate R numbers would get close.
Okay, so we'll have some data to see that. Thank you. One more? Yeah, we will see the effectiveness of the plan, yeah. And each portion of the plan could have its own plan of evaluation. Thank you for those contributions. We have enough information in the literature and our own preliminary data to formally engage in a research project to find a solution for workload disparities. A natural consequence of this process would be the establishment and recognition of multiple ways to advance in rank and achieve tenure. A greater variety of paths would take into account all contributions faculty make to the institution. The design of a robust system of data collection that provides transparency regarding load distribution is essential. Also needed is a redesign of what constitutes service and a clearer system that delineates how these contributions are counted for advancement. We are small enough to be nimble, innovative, and creative in the way where we solve problems. An action research model can help us create an individualized approach to design an equitable distribution of load so that all faculty members can thrive. Thank you.
I'm actually relieved to note that 2 of the 4 Horn Award winners this year that we're recognizing are female. So we're not doing everything wrong, though we could improve. Our next speaker is Gustavo Gregorutti. He's professor of leadership and higher education in the Department of Leadership. He is a researcher and a dissertation supervisor of a number of leadership students around the world. I am most interested in his work on comparing Latin American education systems with the North American education systems. But Professor Gregorutti, the time is yours.
Audio? Here it is. So, all right, let me see. We're in the middle of a, sorry. It's not yet there. How are you doing today? Well, I'm going to share with you a very personal experience. It's a little bit different from what we just heard. Very valuable, of course, but I'm saying I'm going to share with you a little bit of my personal journey through research. And so I want to start with, you understand what the funny thing about barking dogs. You will understand later why. So I want to start with you making a little bit of a comparison about 2 things. And I'm not going to, this time, talking about comparative education in terms of systems, not this time. But yeah. So I'm going to share with you this picture. Look about this. What is that? You know what is that? Neuron, right? Now look this next one. This is London. Now look at this one. This is another neuron, different picture, different, right? And this is another modern city. Then this is another one, and this is Moscow. So try to compare, to analyze, to see here. And this is, anyone knows what is this? What is this? This is a cell with cancer. Now let me show you this one here. This is a typical favela in Latin America, or this is the famous Rosinha in Rio de Janeiro. And this is another cell, cancer cell. Here's another thing. Do you see where I'm going now? Kind of. And this is striking. This is the system, the row system of the United States from each capital of each state. Do you see the patterns there? And this is Europe. And the famous saying, do all roads lead to Rome? Well, actually, it looks like yes. You see? So let me ask you a question. How come? All of these elements are man-made. I mean, I'm talking about roads, I'm talking about cities, big cities. How come? Well, there are multiple answers to this. But one thing that, to me is very impactful is I forgot to put my timer. We can attribute this to one possible element, fractals. As you know this, you already guessed that. So fractals are everywhere. So they're very interesting and puzzling at the same time. So they're actually obey to a basic formula, which is iterate through different combinations and produce this very interesting pattern after nature, after everything that you see. What is really striking to me is that we seem to behave in fractals too. And that is out of any, are we predetermined to do that? So now I'm talking to myself as a researcher. And so once I had experience that I want to share with you as part of this presentation, and it's very related to my journey in this endeavors. I was once getting out of a committee. Those committees are very boring, and so though you don't have that problem, but I do sometimes. And so we were, in the committee, and so I left and finished. And so what I did was a very simple thing. I approached a window, and I heard a barking dog. So I started recording that barking dog, and say, let's analyze that barking dog and see if it behaves like a fractal. So here it is. So you see there, do you see the pattern there? The pattern in his barking and his behavior? He was barking after his owners. And you see the different pigs. Now I have a question for me. Now are coming to me. And it's a very simple question. Do I have a research barking fractal behavior? So I started asking myself, how do I behave as a researcher, and why is it that I behave that way throughout this? I'm going to use 10 years of my productivity to show you some interesting findings that I see in my own life as a professor, as a researcher, and a community of researchers interacting with others. So I'm going to show you a few numbers here, and a few analysis, of course. It's actually, this presentation is about my journey, as I said. So it's about how do I face this and how I behave this way. So I did this analysis here. So the blue lines are publications. The conferences are the kind of orange one. A combination of both is the gray one. So over the last 10 years, although I have about 12 years as a professor, I produce about 100 pieces of conferences and publications, about 5 publications per year, which is a kind of okay size compared with some other professors, and about 5 average conferences per year. So I said to myself, how do I behave in that? So I've noticed that the more I interact with you can see which one is this? The more I interact with others in conference, I tend to be less productive over the last 10 years. Although that is changing a little bit, but still, I tend to be more productive when I go to fewer conferences. So the idea that you go to a conference will spin your productivity, yes and no, So that's one element that it's a pattern that I see over the last 10 years in my life, right? It's just an experience. Then, well, what about barking alone or in pack? You know, do I produce a single or a co-author? And the same thing, as you see, at the beginning of my journey, I tended to produce more alone, which is logical, has some meaning in terms of, well, I didn't have the networking or the connections that later I developed. And then I started to pick more and more on a co-author, which is very good if you want to really improve your productivity. It's very important to be in connection with others. So another question that I have in my own experience is this. Conferences. It's interesting to see that most of my conferences, for about 7 out of 10, let's say, I was a single presenter. And then I started to expand my connections, and here's the pandemic, so it slowed down. That's another fractal that I see, or fractal, let's see, a pattern in my life as a professor and as a researcher. And it's interesting to see that, because 10 years, we'll see another 10 years if we last. What will be the next, you know? So the question is, am I trapped in a research fractal? So does that mean that I'm fixed in those behaviors? Can I change? How come? How I can change? Well, in the formula, you can change, you know, you change the constant or change different iterations, and you can actually produce different fractals. And that's a very interesting finding in my own experience, because I've done this through, and I think these are the topics that I've been exploring. Essentially, it's a faculty research productivity. It's been one of the most important topics to me, how collaboration, north-south, how things are done to produce, to enhance knowledge. How do you generate knowledge? It was one of the most important elements that I produced over the last 10 years. Then the private higher education issues about funding, quality, Seventh-day Adventist education, issues of identity in the system are things that I've been exploring. And engagement is one of the most now emerging, we'll see later, how people can engage into society through academia. And one of the most, let's say, one of the recent shift in my own experience is this idea of wisdom. I'll explain that later. How is it possible for us to become wiser through education? You know, is that possible? It's a very important element. And then Latin American, of course, ranking trends, different system, comparative education, and a little bit about teaching too. If you map that, you can see this. The most important part is the white one for me, because the one is actually the one that is now emerging in my own experience. This idea of wisdom, connecting with people, connecting with communities, engagement, and it's emerging in my own experience as very relevant, right? So that's another very important element. Then the next one, it's about a simple question, but very often professors or researchers ask, is all this relevant? If so, to whom? Why do we produce knowledge? Why do we really engage into, so I just briefly put, first, I have a eager, you know, I look for information, for understanding. So I want to learn about things. If you want to really explore or become a researcher or a professor, that is a very important thing. You want to really learn about why is this happening here. Like Aneri was saying a few minutes ago, she wanted to transform things. How do we do this? How do we do that? Well, you have to understand this, and that takes research, serious research, data-driven, in this case, decisions. So to me, it's very important to carry on research. So the next one is about students. You as a professor, as a future professor, I mean, when you talk, you stand up in front of a crowd, do you really know what you're talking about? or you just read a couple books and that's it? Have you dig into the problems? Well, students are looking for information for really understanding. So research is an essential part of that. It's very important that when we teach using that information and that relevant information that we've been digging into, right? Now, what to me was at the beginning kind of rare, but now later I understood better, the field. When you do research, you enter into the discussion of thousands of professors or researchers or practitioners, depending on what you're looking for, trying to help the whole crowd to understand better and see what works or how things are. So knowledge is never built in one only corner. It's actually a community of researchers. So field is a very important thing. So I would highly recommend you to start connecting with other people who have different, similar, or some differences, but similar interest in the field. Because very often, and this is more for professors, we don't find in our department or in our some college peers to discuss some of the issues. So you go outside and you work with them and you explain things together, right? And team up. I'm currently involved in teams literally from all the continents of the world and trying to understand different issues. And it's very interesting how that happens. A few weeks ago, I received a call, actually an email from a professor from Ottawa University asking me if I want to join them to understand this collaboration South-North, how knowledge is produced in combination South-South, South-North in the world. And he wanted me to be on the Latin American area of the world. And he has a grant, so we're going to be presenting in Ethiopia this next April. He has the funding for everything, and I think it's a very interesting topic. So then we have another person from Asia, so we're going to be working the South-South in combination with the North, and so you become a reference or a connection for some issues, right? The field. Now the faith. The faith is one of the most intriguing parts, at least to me, to be honest with you, because how do we mix our faith background with what we do? This is a very difficult question because sometimes we dig into, methodologies, issues, stats, and so these little details here that we tend to lose what is it that we're doing for in alignment with the mission of being essentially a witness. So I'm going to share briefly before we end, we have a few more minutes, a couple experiences that I had as a researcher around the world. One day when I was entering my career as a professor, I had a conference I think it was in Louisiana, in comparative education. So in order for us to lower our cost, I was at that time professor in Mexico, so I didn't have enough resources. So I put myself on a list of sharing hotels, which is very common in college, but we do it even as a professor, as you can see. So I ended up with two former evangelical pastors in a very nice hotel in the venue, very expensive, $400 a night. So one night, one of them, expressed some of the concerns about some issues. And so I said, why don't we look at the Bible about this? So to be brief, we had a Bible study in the middle of a secular conference with these two former pastors. And they say, you may have some points here. I hear you. And so then we went out to eat something, but the experience of sharing and talking about God, the Bible, in the middle of that was a remarkable one for me. And I said, this is one element of my faith into my research. There's another one, which is very important. It's about my topic. Do you tap into topics that can be useful for others to enlighten them and see as a Christian? Yes. In Humboldt, in Berlin, where I was a doctoral student for second PhD, it's very secular. I mean, Europe is very secular. And so one of the professors said to me, so you're a Christian? Yes. You know what? When I came to this country, he was a foreigner, I thought Christianity was the worst thing for humanity. I said, well, yeah, really, yes. But after living a little bit here, I've noticed that relativism is the worst thing. And actually, some of the values that you hold as a Christian are actually very good. And he's a gay also. And so we had a very interesting, and up to today, we have very, very good exchanges. I don't know how much or how well or how far will that be, or will that impact his life. And somehow, through my research, I was able to connect with that person in a very secular environment. So faith and witness is a very important element of anything. And to finish, once I was walking in Humboldt, Berlin. You know, Humboldt University is one of the most renowned universities back in the 1900s because it mapped the relevance of research in academia. And I saw a sign there that said, the question, translating, right? The question is so good that you should not destroy it with an answer. So I say, wonderful. The question is so good that you should not destroy it or affect it with an answer. And by the way, that word, that phrase was from the Robert Koch, the famous one, physician and doctor. And I say, that's a purpose for higher education and for research. The question is so good. Keep asking questions. Keep looking for answers. One day in heaven we'll have all the answers. We hope so. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that inspiring talk. Our final presenter is Joe Kidder. He's professor of pastoral theology and discipleship, and he's done a lot of research on what causes churches to grow. So, Professor Kidder, the time is yours.
All right, I will change that. That's not the right one. Where? Oh, here. I'm really very happy to be with you. I came to the seminary approximately 20 years ago to teach church growth. And I noticed that what we do in that area is really based more or less on books written by other pastors from evangelical churches. And in the field, pastors were telling me, we really need research that is done in Adventist churches. So we could share it with our leaders so we could all move along. Some of them don't feel comfortable with evangelical books. Some of them feel like maybe this is a different context. I'm not against any of these books, but there was definitely a need to come up with something from Adventist context. So what I did was I called all 59 conferences in the North American division and asked them to give me the churches that are growing at the rate of 5% for 5 years in 3 areas: baptism, membership, and attendance. Guess how many churches qualified for this research? Of 6,000 Seventh-day Adventist churches. 5 churches, which is pitiful. It was crisis for me to see that only 5 churches. So we narrowed the 5% to 3%. We lowered it, and then we lowered the 5 years to 3 years. And now we got 23 churches. Let me give you 2 exclaimers. Number one is that there are other churches that are growing, but not for 3 or 5 consecutive years. Maybe a good year here, and then they go plateauing for 3 or 4 years and then declining. We wanted to see churches that are growing consistently. Second, we eliminated all of the churches that deal with receptive immigrants. We wanted churches that deal with this culture, with American. And the result of that were 2 books, The Big Four and Moving Your Church. Between the 2 of them, actually, about 100,000 copies were sold or given by conferences, which means they resonated with people very, very well. And they have been translated into more than 30 languages, including all of the major ones of the world, like Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, Mandarin, Japanese. So I'm going to just share with you from this book, The Big Four, 1 chapter, which I do believe was groundbreaking in terms of the finding, which is faith-based optimism. Here is the assumption we went with as we started this research. What makes churches grow? The assumption is good programming, good worship and preaching, community engagement, visibility and accessibility, small groups, effective and efficient leadership. Those were the assumptions. We discovered that there were 3 or 4 things that were a lot more important than what we find in most books, and that's what you read in probably thousands or hundreds of thousands of books today written on church growth. Before I tell you what we discovered, I have to tell you also some myths in Adventism. Myth number 1 is that growing churches are about a show, not spiritual. Actually, they are more about being faithful to the Great Commission of Jesus. Another myth is that they are not spiritual. The reality is all the 23 growing Seventh-day Adventist churches were a lot more spiritual than the regular churches. One of them emphasized reading the Bible every year. All of them emphasize prayer. All of them emphasize worship, not the style of worship, but the experience of worship. In fact, I was invited to one of these churches that grew from about 50 to 380 to talk to them about prayer. On a Friday night, there were approximately 120 people. On Sabbath morning, there were about 350, and Sabbath afternoon, there were about 250. And I finished approximately about 5 o'clock, just before sundown, and the pastor stood up in the front of the congregation, and he said, I really feel moved by the Spirit to spend the whole night tonight in a prayer. I was dying to know how many people were going to stay for that. 124 people stayed the whole night. I stayed with them, and my flight was about 6 o'clock in the morning, but I went straight from that wonderful experience all the way to the airport. They compromise the message. They do not compromise the message, but they do package the message for the 21st century. I noticed, like, it's very easy. You go to James White Library here, and you go downstairs to the Heritage Room, and you find that the Bible studies we had that were written in 1850 are the same as the ones that were written in 1950 or the ones that are written in 2020. We really need not to change the message, but to package it differently for our time. They ask very little of their members. They actually ask more of their members, because no matter what the pastor does, church growth always is the responsibility of the members. The leaders have the ability to inspire, to equip, to motivate the laity to do great things for God. And then growing churches are about a charismatic personality. That's not true. But it does require an efficient and an effective leader. And then the last one, growing churches are about contemporary worship service. And that was not true at all. In fact, some of them have contemporary worship services, some have blended, some have traditional or high church. But they all have members who feel the presence of God when they go to church. They all have members who feel like their hearts are touched by the heart of God. All right, here is what we have in the Big Four, the restoration of the role of leadership, and that is about the being. And then the restoration of the role of the laity, and that is the doing by the members. And then the restoration of the role of worship, the experience with God, and the restoration of the role of prayer, and that's releasing the power of God. The book really, especially the Big Four, redefine what church growth is all about. Church growth in the past was about programming. This is moving into more spirituality and prayer. Okay, the restoration of the role of faith-filled leadership. Two simple words that can change you, your church, and your future. A positive and healthy attitude based on hope and faith is the number one human ingredient in church growth. Myself, along with 5 research assistants, we wanted to review the literature to see if there's anything like this written by other authors. We came across 2 or 3 that come very close to it, but it's only in passing. So really, this was groundbreaking discovery in this area. And then I talk about the research, which I already alluded to. In order to be able to study and compare the churches fairly, we excluded the ones that deal with the receptive immigrants and excluded all of the churches that only grow 1 year or 2. And the press asked us not to give the names of the churches because we compare every church with the 3 other churches that were in the similar proximity, and they did not want to embarrass those other churches. So we had to call them A, B, and C, and D, and E. I'm just going to tell you what's written here for the sake of time. Church A was in the south, in a town of approximately 300,000 people. It started with the pastor and his wife and her family, 9 people. But 10 years later, that church grew to 500 people, with a Spanish church connected with it of approximately 50 people. So we identified 3 churches in that town. And I interviewed the pastors and the head elders of every one of those churches. And I asked them, how is your church doing? They said, not good. All Adventist churches in this area are declining. I asked why. They said because the highest number of people who go to church is in our state. Our town has the largest charismatic seminary in the world. They have a huge Baptist seminary and colleges, and they are strong, and we're getting weaker and weaker. And then I interviewed the pastor of the growing church, and here is what he said. Let me show you. When interviewed about his city, the pastor of Church A said, I love living here. The people of our city love God. We pray for them, we meet their needs, and they keep coming to our church. God has been so good to us. We started our church approximately 8 years ago with a handful of people, and today we have over 500 people in attendance. And as I was listening to that, immediately dawned on me what he said. It is faith-based optimism. It is faith-based not on positive thinking, but based on the power of God. He sees things from the perspective of God. And I said, this is a remarkable discovery. We need to share it with everyone. This was repeated 23 times. I'm just going to limit myself to a few of them. Church B was in the Northwest. As you know, the Northwest is the most secular place in the United States. So we did the same thing. We interviewed pastors and leaders from 3 churches. And they all said it is very difficult to grow a church in our area. This area is so secular. The percentage of people who go to church in Paris, France, are higher than the percentage of people who go to church in our area. One of them said, all of our churches in the whole state are declining. And then I interviewed the pastor of the growing churches. He said, the best thing that ever happened to me was to be in this area, because the people of our area do not have church connections, which is very difficult to break. We minister to them, we pray for them, and they come to our church. That church started with about 100 people, 80 to 100, and today is standing at 650. One individual sees the people secular, the other individual sees there is enormous potential here because they don't have any church connection that will prevent them from coming to our church. The other church was in a lumber town. 2 small cities, approximately 40,000 in population. One Adventist church, it dwindled down to 20 because, as you know, lumber today is done by a huge corporation. I come from the Northwest, and I saw that in front of my eyes. They have huge machines that come and do what probably thousands of people can do. The church was defeated. The church got to the point of saying, let's close the door and go somewhere else. The conference came to a retired engineer and asked him to become the pastor of this church. They said to him, we don't care if you even close the doors of the church. We just don't have the money to operate this church. He went over there, and his first sermon was on Joshua and Caleb. And he asked the question, who was right, the minority or the majority? The minority said, God is on our side and we are going to possess the land. The majority said the giants are there. They are going to prevent us from doing that. And of course, people said, well, Caleb and Joshua were right. He said, no, both of them were right. It depends all on your attitude. And he infused that positive attitude that believes in the power of God. And eventually, that church grew to about 450 people. Brand new building. Then it started a Spanish church that has about 60 people today. One major difference between pastors of growing churches and pastors of declining or plateauing churches, and that is the belief and the emphasis on the power of God. That we have a great God, that we have an awesome God who is on our side, and He is going to help us be successful in our work. A couple more examples. One of them happened in a city of 6 million people. Most churches are declining except the churches that are dealing with receptive immigrants. So I called 9, 10 people. I said, how is your church doing? Not good. This is very secular, or this is very Baptist or charismatic. I said, what about the future? It doesn't look good. All Adventist churches are not doing well. And then I interviewed the pastor of the growing church. He took that church when it was declining. Maybe 30 people were coming. And this is what he said. He said, our role is to be faithful to God. And we know that God is always faithful to us. That church today is about 700 people in attendance. And then the last one happened in a small town not too far away from here. Small town, small church, about 20 people. And a new pastor came, and he infused in the heart of the congregation that lost people matter to God, and they should matter to us. That the purpose of the church is not just to exist. The purpose of the church is to win the lost for Jesus. That church, in about 5 years, it grew to 180 people with a lot of innovative and effective programs to reach the community. That is really the most significant discovery we made when it comes to church growth. It was not about programming. Programming are good and important, and they create awareness in the church. It was more about what God can do in our midst. It's interesting how many excuses we heard. My church is in a poor section of town. People have to work 2 or 3 jobs. Therefore, they are not interested in God, or they don't have the time for God. Or my church is in an affluent part of town. People have everything they need. Therefore, they don't need God. Another one said, my church is in a post-modern area, and everything goes except the Bible. And you hear excuse after excuse after excuse. But what was consistent among the 23 pastors that we interviewed was that there is no challenge that God cannot overcome. And if we believe in Him, we are going to see amazing result for the kingdom of God. It's interesting, 7 times in the Bible it says that God can do the impossible. One day God came to a woman who was 91 years old. Her husband was 100. And he said to her, I'm going to give you a child. And she laughed. She thought it was a joke. I mean, after all, she was a candidate for the nursing home, not the maternity ward. But God gave her the child anyway, because he is the God of the impossible. I'm going to skip all these slides and just show you a couple things. Today, the situation is much the same as it was in the first century. In the first century, there were three major philosophical ideas that were represented by three major cities. Jerusalem represented a tradition, uninterested people, and rigidity in belief. Athens represented modern philosophy and openness to new ideas. Rome represented post-modernity, a culture of entertainment, hero worship, and hedonism. And in every city, faithful Christians faced unbelievable persecution. But in spite of all of these challenges that are no easier than the one we face today, the Christian gospel is spread and the kingdom of God grew in a phenomenal way. In fact, the Christian church never grew as fast as it did in the first century. And I'm going to close with reading a quotation from Ellen G. White. Prayer and faith will do what no power upon earth can accomplish. We need not be so anxious and troubled. The human agent cannot go everywhere and do everything that needs to be done. Often imperfections manifest themselves in the work, but if we show unwavering trust in God, not depending upon the ability or talent of man, the truth will advance. Let us place all things in God's hands, leaving him to do the work in his own way, according to his own will, through whomsoever he may choose. Those who seem to be weak, God will use if they are humble. Human wisdom, unless daily controlled by the Holy Spirit, will prove foolishness. We must have more faith and a trust in God. He will carry out his work with success. Earnest prayer and faith will do for us what our own devising cannot do. Thank you very much.
Let's thank all four of our speakers once again. This ends our plenary session. Coming up next, we have the poster presentations of all the other faculty and student researchers out in the first floor hallways. We have food for you for the reception. And then at 3 o'clock in Bowler 250 and 251 will be the other oral breakout sessions. So thank you all for coming, and we'll see you at the poster session.